Hello everyone and welcome to Underwater Adventures with Alex Mirabal. Today we will talk about how to find a shipwreck, an historic shipwreck, and how to do it successfully. So let's dive into it. The first thing that one needs to do to start working with shipwrecks and study them and researching about historic shipwrecks is obviously to find one. You have to go out to the sea and find a shipwreck. Sometimes shipwrecks come to you because someone found it in a casual way because they were in the holidays or they were just walking down the beach and they saw some remains and then they come and inform. But in the regular way, you have to go and look for the shipwreck. Today we will talk about how one does that, which are the regular steps that you need to take, and which are the different ways of successfully finding a shipwreck, an historic shipwreck. Let's start by the fact that we have already mentioned that the ship, it doesn't look under the sea, an historic ship, it doesn't look like a real ship. Wood has disappeared, so the remains are normally scarce and very difficult to spot and to identify. This will be the first problem you will face when you go trying to find and locate and identify that you have actually found a shipwreck. The first method, let's say, the first and the most orthodox way of going and try to locate a shipwreck is starting by the archives. Every naval power in the past, like Spain, Portugal, England, they all have very good archives in which they record everything that happened during all these years. So obviously, loss of ships, which were very important machines at the time, they are all duly recorded and many details given in some cases. In other cases, you have almost vague information or somehow vague information about where the ship was lost, and you also will have to deal with that. And I'm mentioning this because this plays a very important role in you selecting which shipwreck you will try to find. It's not only because you are in love with that shipwreck or it has a beautiful story and you have to find it to unravel some of the old mysteries and everything. If you don't have enough information from the archive to actually be able to locate the ship, most probably you will be burning your funds, money, normally from someone else. So you really have to act consciously in the moment of making the decision of going to try to find a certain shipwreck. This will be, and I mentioned the archives because the archives is what we consider a primary source. It is a source that you can really trust because it was written at the time, it was with the details of the time. It's not a transcription from someone who read and transported it into a book, which would be a secondary source if they did it that way. So as much as you can, please rely on the archives and the historians and the people who work in the archives. Once you have found an interesting file, an interesting document that will point you to a certain shipwreck that it really worth finding and studying, then you have, as I mentioned, to try to understand if the location information you will have in those archival files is enough for you to go and try to find it. In the ideal case, there would be references either to the reef when she ran aground, or if it's a naval battle, where was the naval battle, and not coordinates because you will not have coordinates, but indications of transits inland or regarding to other islands or geographical features that will allow you to establish a manageable area. What is a manageable area? You cannot simply explore 500 miles of seabed times 500 miles. That's not human. You cannot do it. We will get there one day when the technology advanced so much, but with the means that we have today and with the means that are available for most of us, you have to have a sensibly smaller area than that. This will be your first criteria to decide which shipwreck you will try to find. The second would be if this area is searchable with which tool. Because you have different tools to try to search long areas, to try to locate the shipwreck. What would you use? A magnetometer? What would you use? A side scan sonar? There are different tools that depend in great deal of the type of seabed you have, the conditions in the sea, the depth. Also shipwrecks, for instance, that this is happening a lot to me, shipwrecks which are in reefs are shipwrecks you can not use the side scan sonar. Side scan sonar will give you shapes, it will give you a return of the sound wave, and it will mark shapes independently of their origin. So you will see rocks, you will see boulders, it will be very difficult to spot the remains of a shipwreck.
So it would be more confusing.
It will be almost impossible for you to beforehand knowing what have you found. You could see a funny feature and you said, this may be an anchor, this may be a cannon, then you dive and it's just a rock.
Yeah.
So in these cases, when you have, let's say, it's a long coral area, it is preferable, it's better to use, it's better to use the magnetometer. Why? Because the magnetometer is a tool that measures the magnetic field of the Earth in each point. Every object that is made of iron or ferromagnetic material, it will distort that magnetic field and it will give you what we call a magnetic anomaly. You will see it in the screen of the Mac. It could be modern trash, it could be internet cable, it could be electricity cable that is going from one town to the other and pass through the bottom of the ocean. It could be plenty of things, but it could also be cannons, anchors, and every ship brought a lot of this ferromagnetic material, this from nails and cannonballs and everything. So this will help you. Ideally, you will have a funny shape or an interesting shape in the side scan sonar and also a response from the magnetometer in the same spot. Then you will be almost sure that you have found something which is man-made. If not, if you cannot use the side scan sonar or you don't have one or the conditions don't allow for the side scan sonar, with the magnetometer you will have a hint and where you have to dive. Normally what happened in my expeditions, you search long areas and you come up with, let's say, 150 magnetic anomalies. Obviously, you haven't found 150 shipwrecks. You will have to go dive. With experience, you know a little bit better. This magnetic anomaly looks better than the other one. This one is big, or there is a small area in which are many anomalies, which also will indicate that most probably is a shipwreck because it's a dispersion field of elements of the shipwreck instead of isolated anomalies. But you almost have to check them all. So you have to dive in every of these anomalies every time to try to understand what are you reading, what are you recording, what your instrument is doing. So that would be, let's say, like the regular way of going out and try to locate a shipwreck that you already know by the archive information that is in that area. Ish. Somewhere there, somewhere here, mile more, mile less. You have also to be familiar with the old measurement units. They many times give you distances in leagues and some other units that we don't use today. It is very important to know also from which countries come in this information, because the British have one type of measurements, the French have another one, Portuguese and Spaniards as well. So you really have to be careful when selecting the area and making yourself a prediction of where you could find this wreck. Another element which is very important in the archive is that many people, unfortunately, they focus on the treasures that the ship was carrying. So that would be the motivation of many of the operators to go and try to find a shipwreck. Then they also make sometimes big mistakes, because in the report of the ship and the loss of the ship, many times appear big numbers of money. It was lost with the cargo value in 3 million pesos. 3 million pesos was a lot of money, but it was a cargo in the value of 3 million pesos. Could be perishable stuff, could be silk, could be pepper, could be many things that they were 3 million pesos at the time, but you will not find them today. But as I said before, the most important information you can get from the archive files is the location information, to see if you have enough information about the location that will allow you to go and reasonably, with reasonable expectations to find your wreck. I can put you an example. A naval battle. I searched for a wreck, the San José, 1622, in front of Mozambique, which was sunk during a naval battle. The naval battles are very difficult to find the wrecks produced in a naval battle unless it's inside a bay. But when it's in the open sea, first, there is no geographical feature to relate to, because they are simply fighting in the middle of the sea. Second, the people who are with their jobs was to write down everything. They probably busy trying not to get killed, so they are not also they are not writing down every single event within the battle. In the case of the San José, that was part of the fleet of 1622 from Portugal to Goa, India, it was attacked by a combined fleet of Dutch and British ships, English and Dutch ships. It was called the Fleet of Defense, and they were in war with Portugal at the time, so they were trying to make prisoners and take treasures from every Portuguese ship that they encountered. And in this battle, there was, thanks God, there was a priest. His name was Padre Jerónimo Lobo, who was writing down everything, even during the battle. So the elements that this man wrote down, it helped me almost 400 years later to locate the wreck. It was a very long expedition. It was many square miles of seabed that we had to scan with the magnetometer, but finally we found the wreck.
I have a question.
Yep.
Would you say that the priest was kind of impartial in his recording of the events?
Oh no, by no means.
Okay.
No, by no means. When you are dealing with shipwrecks and maybe in a battle or a ship that was attacked by another ship, you will have two completely different versions. The guy who won and the guy who lost.
Yeah.
The guy who lost will always try to justify in front of his king that either it was not so much money that they lost,
yeah,
or they lost it heroically.
Yeah.
You know, they were heroes,
Yeah.
they were in the way, and the other ones will also, the winners, that will also blow up the amount of money that they recover from the enemy
Of
ship.
course.
So you have to be really careful which kind of information are you using and why are you using it for. In this case, there was a little twist, because this San Jose, they were previous teams before me and my team that went there trying to find the wreck, and they couldn't. They didn't manage to find the wreck. What make a difference that our team and that team and those previous teams is that we were more familiar with the area, and the reading and the understanding of the archival documents for us was a little bit more coherent. Knowing this is in front of a 17-kilometer beach of white sand. It's about 7 miles away from land, but what you have in the coastline is an uninterrupted white sand beach of 17 kilometers. It's huge and it's beautiful. And in the reports of this Padre Jerónimo Lobo, he mentions that one boat that was transporting some treasure and some people to land during the battle tried to save them. It smashed against the rocks in the coast. There was only one place with rocks in the entire 17 kilometers, just one place that has now a lighthouse. So that gave me the indication where to start my search from, and opening the cone and trying. Well, we managed to find it, but when you read historical documents, you have to pay attention to these details. Also, who is writing it, if it's someone from the crown, if it's an official, or if it's a priest, or if it's a surgeon of the ship, because that task passed from one to the other within the cruise. So this is, let's say, the most reliable way of being successful in going out to the sea and finding a certain shipwreck. Take into account that either with the magnetometer, with the side-scan sonar, with visual survey, if you are in an area which is dangerous for navigation, you will find other wrecks, and it gets confusing if they are the wrecks that you are looking for or not. So that takes us to the second way of finding shipwrecks, which is not based on the archival information, but based on marine hazards and areas with former heavy navigation traffic, that they were close to important cities, and then there are geographical features that make navigation complex. Remember that in the past they didn't have the very accurate sea charts, the sailing was much more dangerous than today, and even today you have accidents in those places because navigation is difficult. So that would be a second way of doing it. Going to an area that you know that shipwrecks can occur. There could be plenty of shipwrecks in the area because you still even have modern ones. Modern shipwrecks are also a good indication that the area, it has been dangerous always. So you can go search that area. In those expeditions it is very common that you will come across several wrecks from different centuries, different countries of origin. You will have, and you have to be very careful in how to analyze what you are finding. So in this kind of survey, normally either is with magnetometer or side-scan sonar or visual survey. If the water is shallow enough and is clean enough, you can use visual survey with trained divers that can tell apart what could be a very misshaped anchor or a cannon to a funny coral formation. So, or they can identify ballast stones, they can identify the certain elements that will guide you to the wreck. Then it's also, it needs to be taken into account that not every time that you find a man-made object on the seabed, like an anchor or a cannon, it means that there is a shipwreck. There are plenty of reasons for these objects to lay isolated on the seabed. They could have anchored a ship, the anchor got foul in a rock or something, they couldn't pull it up, they cut the ropes and they left the anchor behind and replaced it with another anchor because they travel with plenty of anchors, because yes, exactly because of that. Sometimes even ships ran aground in a reef in shallow waters with reasonably good weather, not bad weather, but with good weather, and they tried to lighten the ship throwing things overboard. So the ship gets lighter. Sometimes they even throw cannons. Was not a very good practice because then they were not so much armed and they need to defend themselves. But sometimes you find that. So isolated objects, but there is no wreck because the ship at the end didn't sink. It refloats and left. One good indicator are the ballast stones. In the case of the Iberian ships of the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century, they were carrying ballast in form of big stone, the river stones, these big boulders which are very heavy, highly mineralized and very dense, to low down the gravity center of the ship the most possible, because the ship was tilting too much and could flip. So that was the function of the ballast in the belly of the ship, in the hold of the ship. They will put all these ballast stones. When you find a heap of ballast stones on the seabed in the Caribbean or in any other sea, you know they are not from there. These are river stones. They are not from there naturally. And for a ship to low down or to spill so much ballast, it must have had a big hole in the hull, a big hole in the hull. So, or it sank there. So ballast stones are a very good indicator, at least in the Caribbean area, because if you go a little bit to volcanic islands like Cape Verde or Canary Islands, these are volcanic islands, so these rocks are very common in the seabed as well, so it will be very difficult to tell apart what belongs to a shipwreck or what is just natural. So, but in coral seas, in seas that are mainly coral informations, these rocks will spot, you will be able to spot them, and you have a good chance to having found a shipwreck of the 16th, 17th, 18th, or 19th century. So these are elements that during your expedition of exploration, trying to find shipwrecks, you have to take into account, not to lose too much time in things that are isolated finds, or to pay attention really even if the first elements that you find from a wreck are not that exciting, because not all the time you arrive to a place and you see 17 cannons and 4 anchors and a heap of ballast stones. That doesn't happen so often. So you really have to pay attention even to the smallest detail to explore a little bit more around that spot and try to understand if that is an isolated find or belong to an archaeological context. In any case, expeditions that are made to go and try to explore to find a shipwrecks, I can tell you, they are very stressful. Because this is the kind of expedition in which you fail every day. When you are excavating a wreck, you are in a systematic work that you have to do excavating, and every day something happens. You find something, you discover a new thing. In a survey expedition and an exploration of the seabed, looking for a particular wreck, every day that you don't find a wreck, you fail. And this is something that you really have to be careful when leading a team doing this kind of expeditions, because people can get rapidly demotivated. Nobody likes to fail every day.
Easy to get frustrated.
Yeah, totally. And you are away from home. And when you go with your information, you are always optimistic that you have the right information. So you will find the wreck fairly soon. And fairly soon can turn into months. Yeah. Months can turn into years. And it can get really frustrating. And you always find the wreck in the last day of the expedition. This is something I got that with there was a journalist that was making an interview to me when we found the São José, and I told her, yeah, and we found the wreck the last day, and she was all excited because she said, oh well, it was the last day, great, I mean, what a coincidence. And I said, no, but we always find the wreck in the last day of expedition. She said, how come? This is a sort of magic or no, it's because when you find it, you stop looking for it. Expedition is over. So you always find it the last day of expedition. But before that, it can get really hard to keep the motivation and do the right thing, not to cut corners, not to try to come with gut feelings. They don't work. They don't work in at least in maritime archaeology and looking for shipwrecks, gut feelings, they don't simply work. Once you find the wreck, you can say, yeah, I had the gut feeling that morning, but that's after you find it. So this takes me to a third way of finding shipwrecks or to look for shipwrecks, and is the fishermen and the local community information. I know of some colleagues and some scholars which underestimate the value of the information that the local community and the fishermen have about their surroundings, of the seabed surrounding their areas, their towns, and the areas where they fished, where they work. They think or they say that, okay, fishermen are not trained in this discipline, so they cannot tell you if this is from this century or the other. They can barely tell apart if it's a wreck or is a natural feature. Not true. They do know at least that there is something which doesn't belong to the seabed, and they are incredibly accurate in taking you back to the place and telling you it's here. They are as human GPSs. These people are simply amazing. I have worked very closely with the local communities in several countries because they are an incredibly rich source of knowledge. Sometimes they don't even realize, because this is not what they do. The fishermen go to the sea to catch fish. They don't go for an anchor or for a cannon or for a shipwreck. So, but they do know, and you really can profit from this cooperation with them big time, because they are the ones who know. On the other hand, you have also the fact that when you are in an expedition trying to locate a shipwreck, you are working 24 hours. You are working all the time. And why I mention this? Because, for instance, a wreck that, well, I will not start by this. One time, working in Mozambique, in Ilha de Mozambique, we had to make our shopping for food and supplies and basic things in a city which is called Nampula, which is about 100 and some kilometers away. It is a long trip, so we went once a week to buy food for the team, to buy water, to buy some essentials. And in the way to Nampula, in the expedition car to go shopping, in front of us there was a truck with 3 beautiful bronze cannons from the 16th century on top, just driving to Nampula. I saw them. I said, what is these cannons are moving? You could have guessed, okay, they are moving from one museum to the other, but it didn't really look like. It was more a truck, more utilitarian than a truck that will transport valuable archaeological pieces. So I stopped them and I asked them, what about these cannons, what you guys are doing? They said, no, we found them in the sea. We are going to Nampula to sell them as scrap metal. And I said, no way, that you can, I mean, come on, you cannot sell this. They said, no, it's a lot of money. For us, it's a lot of money. I mean, they were paid at the time, I'm talking about now, about 2006, 2006 or 2005. And they were paid about $1 per kilo of bronze. With these 3 cannons, they might have had more than 2,500 kilos, so that would be $2,500. That for them may have been like some years of work. So for them, it's attractive as well. I negotiate with them and I recover the cannons from them. I mean, I pay them, not what the scrap metal would pay, but I pay them, and also I would pay them for them to show me the place where they took them from, which ended up in the finding, thanks to them, the finding of a 1554 shipwreck from Portugal, the Nossa Senhora, can't remember, Nossa Senhora dos Burgaleses, 1554, that was, I mean, it's lost for many years, or centuries, nobody knew where she was, but fishermen knew. And then the fishermen also, because this is a result of this interaction with the fishermen and the local communities, they also understood that it would be better for them to come up with the information and with the object, because I would pay for the information. You have to do that if you want to protect underwater cultural heritage. If you don't engage in these kind of things in the seabed will be slowly disappearing, because there are populations that they need these objects, they can convert them into money. So this is something you have to, if you go in any moment to an expedition trying to find a shipwreck in whatever corner of the world that could be very isolated, please get close to the local community and the fishermen in the area, because they will help you tremendously, and you might be able also to help them in certain ways, you know, with supplies and stuff. So do that as well. I have another example of how accurate fishermen are in their knowledge, because they have an immense knowledge of the seabed surrounding their towns. When we found a wreck in Cuba that is called Fuxa, I will tell you about that in another video. This Fuxa wreck, we were working there for 3 seasons. 3 seasons is 8 months each year, so we were there for 3 years, excavating the wreck and exploring the surrounding areas. And one evening, we were in Dimas. It's a fisherman town, very small, about 5 miles away from the wreck, that it has only one bar, and obviously there we were all, and the fishermen sitting there in the evening. And I was talking to one fisherman that said, near where you're working, very close to where you're working, there are 2 cannons which are on the seabed in form of a cross. One is pointing almost to the surface and the other one is laying on the seabed. And I said, it cannot be too close, because we have been there for already 3 years. We know the surrounding area, but by perfection, there is no way that there is an object bigger than a shoe that we haven't seen. And the guy said, no, they are really close. They might be 100 meters away from the stern of your ship. I said, it cannot be. So he took me in his boat. We were almost at night. He didn't even have enough light. And we dropped a buoy in a place, for me totally enigmatic, because we went around the reefs and he arrived, dropped a buoy. Next day when we were there to resume our excavation, we realized that the cross cannons, which were very visible from long distance with clean waters as they were there, were about 150 meters away from our excavation. So the capacity that these workers of the sea have of locating things, to coming back to the place that they found something interesting, to transport this information, this is something that you really need to take into consideration when you try to go finding a shipwreck in an area which is not your area. That would be taking us to the last way of finding shipwrecks, but that one is like very simple. It's when you find it by chance. You are swimming in the beach, you hit the cannon with your foot, or someone tells you, I found this anchor, or pieces of glass, or pieces of porcelain, or something, and then you come across a shipwreck. That one, let's say, is the less probable, and if you are in the industry of finding and studying shipwreck, this is one that you will not want to rely on. Okay, that will be all for today. Thank you guys for watching, and if you like the video, please give me a like and subscribe to the channel, and keep on watching Underwater Adventures with Alex Mirabal. I will be reading the comment section, so please leave your impressions there, whatever questions you may have, or whatever subject you want me in this area that you want me to bring, just please let me know, and I will be trying to please everyone. So see you next time.